Have you ever believed in someone so completely that you'd bet your life on their love, only to find out decades later that it was all a performance? That's what happened to me. I had been married to Linda for 40 years. We had built a home together, raised children together, even buried loved ones side by side. To the world, we looked like the perfect couple. People envied our marriage, called us an example of lasting love. But one rainy night, the mask slipped. I wasn't supposed to hear it. I had come downstairs quietly, hoping for a glass of water, when I stopped at the edge of the kitchen. Linda was on the phone. She thought I was asleep. Her voice was low, careful, but every word cut into me like a knife. Yes, it's almost time. He's slowing down. Once everything is signed, the house and land will be mine. Can you believe he still thinks I love him? 40 years and he never saw through it. But it was worth it. All of it for the property. I froze in the dark, gripping the wall to keep from falling. My chest felt hollow, my ears rang. She kept speaking, calm as if she were discussing the weather. Except she was dismantling my life with every syllable. 40 years. 40 years of smiles. Dinners, anniversaries, whispered promises. All reduced to a business transaction. The worst part. She laughed. A soft, cruel laugh that I had never heard before. The laugh of someone who believed she had already won. I stood there, hidden in the shadows, staring at the woman I had called my wife, realizing I had never truly known her. Every kiss, every touch, every I love you had been an investment. She had played the long game, waiting patiently for the day I was too old to resist, too trusting to question, and too tired to fight. When she finally hung up the phone and walked past me toward the stairs, she didn't even glance my way. I don't think she realized how close I had been, how much I had heard. I stayed in the kitchen for hours, staring at the floor, replaying her words again and again. She had never loved me. She had only ever loved the property. That night, something inside me broke, but something else also woke up. For 40 years, she had pretended. But now it was my turn. I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. No, I would play the same game she had played with me. Patient, quiet, calculated, and when the truth came out, it wouldn't just ruin her plans. It would destroy the perfect little world she had built on lies. Sleep didn't come to me that night. I lay there beside her, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing. How many times had I thought it sounded peaceful, comforting, like home? But now every sound from her lips felt like poison. My mind ran wild, dragging me through decades of our life together. All those little moments I had brushed aside suddenly took on a new, sinister shape. I remembered the early years when we didn't have much. I worked long hours at the mill, sometimes coming home bone-tired, hands blistered and aching. She would greet me with dinner, sometimes with a smile, but she always had a way of steering the conversation back to one thing: the land. She'd ask about the property, what improvements I was making, what the house would be worth one day. Back then I thought it was pride. Now I saw it for what it was: obsession. I thought of the arguments too, the ones we'd buried under polite laughter. Every time I mentioned selling a piece of the land, she'd flare up. "Don't you dare," she'd hiss. "This is our future. You promised me stability." It had felt like she was protecting our dream, but now I realized she wasn't protecting us. She was protecting her inheritance even with our children. She seemed to use them like pawns in the game. If I ever resisted her plans, she'd say things like, "Think of the kids, think of their future." But the kids grew up and moved out. Still, her eyes always came back to the house, the deeds, the value written on paper. And then there were the moments I had ignored because love blinds you. Birthdays where she didn't really care for the gifts I gave, but her eyes lit up when I showed her the new improvements on the house. Anniversaries where she insisted we stay home instead of travel, because why waste money when we need to maintain the property? She even discouraged me from making other investments, telling me it was risky, when really she just wanted to keep everything tied to the land she planned to claim. 40 years. Every smile, every thank you, every "I'm proud of you," all tangled in a net of property, deeds, and ownership. And then I remembered the one thing that sealed my suspicion. A few years back, I'd gotten sick. Not deathly sick, just a rough patch where the doctors told me to slow down. Instead of comfort, Linda had seemed anxious, not for me, but for the paperwork. She pushed me to finalize documents, update the will, even had me sit in front of a lawyer while I was still foggy from medication. At the time, I thought she was just being practical. Now I could see the greed bleeding through her concern. Sitting there in the dark, watching her sleep, I realized I had been living in a carefully built illusion. She had crafted it perfectly. The loyal wife, the supportive partner, the loving mother. And I, the fool, had been the audience clapping for a performance that was never real. But if she thought she could fool me forever, she had miscalculated. The 40 years of lies weren't going to crush me. They were going to fuel me. Because if she wanted my property, she'd have to fight me for it. And I was ready to play her game better than she ever imagined. The morning after that terrible discovery, I did something I never thought I'd be capable of. I lied to her. When she woke up, she smiled at me the way she always did, kissed my cheek and asked if I'd slept well. Normally, I would have told her the truth. But this time, I matched her performance with one of my own. I smiled back and said, like a baby. Inside, I was seething. But outside, I was calm. For the first time in 40 years, I wasn't her husband anymore. I was her opponent. I decided then that if she had spent decades pretending for property, then I would spend however long it took pretending to be the same oblivious, trusting man she thought I was. Because people like Linda, who believe they're smarter than everyone else, always let their guard down when they think the game is already won, so I started watching her carefully. At breakfast, I noticed how quickly she shifted the conversation toward my health. She suggested we schedule more doctor's visits. She offered to take over managing the bills. She even asked me, too casually, about renewing some insurance papers. Her performance was smooth, but I had learned to read the cracks. I nodded along, pretended to be grateful, even chuckled and said, "What would I do without you, Linda?" She glowed at that, not because of my affection, but because she thought her little plan was still working. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I made my first moves. I drove to the county clerk's office alone, pretending I had errands. I requested copies of every property deed, every mortgage record, every legal paper tied to my name. I wanted to see the battlefield clearly, and what I found was chilling. Over the years, she had carefully positioned herself as my helper in all legal matters. Her name appeared as co-signer on certain accounts. She had insisted on being listed as beneficiary on insurance policies. Some deeds had her signature in neat little places I hadn't even noticed at the time. It was worse than I thought. She hadn't just been pretending. She had been planting seeds for decades, preparing for the harvest of my life's work. That night, I sat at my desk, surrounded by stacks of papers, feeling the weight of betrayal. But I didn't crumble. Instead, I picked up a pen and wrote down 3 words: change the plan. I contacted a lawyer the very next day. Not the one she had chosen years ago, the one she always pushed me toward. No. I found someone completely new, someone she didn't know existed. A younger attorney in town with a reputation for being sharp and discreet. I laid it all out for him. My suspicions, what I had overheard, the 40 years of deception. He didn't interrupt, just took notes and leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing in disbelief. When I finished, he asked only one question. "How far are you willing to go?" And I told him the truth. As far as I have to. Because for the first time, this wasn't just about property. It wasn't just about money or land. It was about reclaiming my dignity. It was about proving that I wasn't the fool she thought I was. From that day on, every smile I gave her, every affectionate word, every casual nod, it was all part of the act. I was no longer her husband, I was the hunter, and Linda, she was my prey. It didn't take long for Linda to sense something had shifted. One evening, she watched me across the dinner table. Her fork paused in midair. For 40 years, I had been predictable. If I was tired, I said so. If I was upset, I showed it. I was always an open book, but now I was a closed vault. "You've been quiet lately," she said, narrowing her eyes. "Is everything all right?" I looked up, met her gaze, and gave her the warmest smile I could muster. "I'm fine. Just thinking about the future, that's all." Her shoulders relaxed, but her eyes lingered a second too long. She was suspicious, but not enough. Not yet. That became her pattern in the weeks that followed. Small, probing questions, carefully worded. She'd ask about doctor's appointments, about whether I had paid the property taxes, about my plans if something were to happen to me, always with that sweet, gentle tone that used to make me feel cared for. Now it sounded like poison disguised as honey. I played my part well. I even started leaving papers on my desk in plain view, old bank statements, insurance letters, just to watch her sneak glances when she thought I wasn't looking. I could almost see the calculations running behind her eyes. But here's the thing about people like Linda. Arrogance is their biggest weakness. She had played her game so long, so flawlessly, that she believed she was untouchable. She thought I was still the same naive husband she had manipulated for decades, and that arrogance made her sloppy. One afternoon, while she was out shopping, I checked her drawer in the study. I wasn't surprised to find a neatly folded folder tucked beneath some scarves. Inside were documents she had been quietly collecting, lists of assets, copies of deeds, even a note reminding herself to check with lawyer about title transfer. That was all the proof I needed. Not just suspicion anymore, cold, hard evidence that she was moving pieces behind my back. But instead of confronting her, I slid the folder back exactly where I found it. I wanted her to think I was still blind, still clueless, because the deeper she sank into her own web, the harder it would be for her to crawl out when the trap snapped shut. From that moment, my strategy changed. I didn't just want to protect my property anymore. I wanted her exposed. I wanted the world to see the truth about the woman who had worn the mask of a loving wife for 40 years. So I leaned in harder to the role. I laughed at her jokes, let her hold my hand in public, even agreed when she suggested I should rest more and let her handle the business side of things. But behind the curtain, my lawyer and I were rewriting the entire story. Quietly, every deed was transferred, every insurance policy adjusted, every account secured under names and trusts she couldn't touch. And the best part? She had no idea. To her, the cracks she noticed in me were nothing more than age, fatigue, or the weight of life catching up, but to me, those cracks weren't weakness. They were the beginning of her downfall. The weeks rolled by, and Linda's confidence only grew. She began to tighten her grip in subtle but unmistakable ways. I noticed she started taking more control over conversations with our children. During family dinners, she'd steer topics toward inheritance, security, and how difficult it would be for me to manage things in the coming years. One Sunday afternoon, our eldest son, Mark, came over. I was sitting in my favorite chair when Linda put her hand on his shoulder and said, "Your father's getting older, you know. We need to think about the future, about stability. Don't you agree?" Mark looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. "Mom, Dad's fine. He's stronger than I am half the time." Linda gave a soft laugh, the kind that's meant to sound innocent but carries a hidden edge. "Oh, you're sweet. But you'll see, it's always better to be prepared." I sat there silently, watching the scene play out. Once those words might have wounded me. Now they were just proof. Proof that her mask was cracking and she couldn't resist pushing her agenda. And it wasn't just the kids. She began inserting herself into every corner of my life. She started answering the phone before I could get to it. She intercepted the mail, claiming she was just helping out. Even little things, like correcting me in front of others, or insisting she handle all financial matters, and grew bolder. But every move she made, every string she pulled only revealed her desperation. She wasn't just waiting anymore. She was accelerating. She wanted control now. What she didn't know was that I had already anticipated her. Behind closed doors, my lawyer and I had fortified every piece of my estate. The property deeds were already locked into an irrevocable trust. The accounts were secured under ironclad conditions. And the will she thought she was manipulating? It had been rewritten, with clauses that would turn her smile into ash the moment she tried to claim victory. Still, I let her keep spinning her web, because the deeper she wove it, the more damning it would look when the truth came out. One evening, she sat across from me sipping her tea, her eyes sharp despite the sweet smile on her lips. "You know, darling," she said softly, "if anything ever happened to you, I'd make sure the house and land stayed in the family. You wouldn't have to worry." I set my cup down slowly, meeting her gaze. "I know," I said. "I trust you completely." And the satisfaction that flickered in her eyes almost made me laugh. She thought the net was tightening around me. But in reality, she was walking willingly into a cage I had already built for her, and soon, the door would slam shut. If Linda wanted me weak and dependent, then weak and dependent is exactly what I'd give her. It started small. I began moving slower around the house, letting out a tired sigh when I stood up, rubbing my temples as if a headache had settled in. I'd sit longer in my chair, staring out the window, pretending my thoughts were foggy. At first, she didn't notice, but soon her eyes sharpened. "Are you feeling all right?" she asked one morning, her hand brushing my arm. Her voice was filled with that practiced concern I had mistaken for love so many times before. I forced a smile. "Just tired. Maybe I'm not as young as I used to be." She patted my hand, but I caught the flicker in her expression. It wasn't worry. It was satisfaction. From then on, I leaned into the act. I let her take over the bills, pretending it was a relief. I missed a step on the stairs once, caught myself, but exaggerated the stumble just enough for her to see. I even forgot small details in conversations, letting her believe my mind was slipping. And just like I expected, she swooped in with her net. She scheduled doctor's appointments for me, ones I forgot to attend unless she came along. She hovered when I opened the mail, insisting she handle it instead. She even began mentioning the nursing home down the road, disguised as a suggestion. "It might give you peace of mind," she said one evening, her eyes glinting, though her tone was soft. "You wouldn't have to worry about all the responsibility. They'd take care of you and I could handle everything else. I knew exactly what that meant, but I didn't protest. I nodded slowly as though the idea might be worth considering. That was the moment her confidence bloomed. She thought the finish line was finally in sight. What she didn't know was that I had already spoken with the nursing home manager weeks earlier. He was an old family friend, someone she didn't even know I was still in contact with. I told him everything, down to the smallest detail, and he agreed to play along. If she thought she could dump me in a home while she cashed in on my life's work, she was about to discover just how wrong she was, because my act wasn't just for her. It was setting the stage for the greatest reveal of her life. Each time I clutched my chest and leaned back in my chair, I could see her satisfaction grow. Each time I let her think she was a step ahead, I was already 2 steps further. Linda thought she was tightening the noose around me. But really, she was tying it around her own neck. The day finally came when Linda decided to make her move. It was a bright morning, deceptively peaceful. She walked into the living room with that sweet smile that, once upon a time, could melt me, but now I saw it for what it was. A mask. "Darling," she said softly, sitting next to me, her hand sliding onto mine. "I've been thinking about you, about your health. I think it's time we look into some professional care, just to make life easier for you. There's a wonderful facility not far from here. You'd be comfortable, safe, surrounded by people who know how to take care of you." She looked into my eyes like she was offering me a gift. But her eyes betrayed her. There was no love, no warmth, only calculation. I nodded slowly, pretending to hesitate. Maybe you're right," I whispered, my voice trembling as though I were finally giving in. The flicker of triumph in her eyes nearly made me laugh out loud. She thought she had me exactly where she wanted me. That afternoon, she drove me to the nursing home. She hummed along to the radio, tapping her fingers against the steering wheel, looking more cheerful than she had in years. To her, this was Victory Day. When we arrived, the manager, Mr. Harris, greeted us warmly at the entrance. Linda shook his hand firmly as though sealing a deal. "I'm so glad you had space for my husband," she said, squeezing my arm a little too tightly. Harris glanced at me and I saw the recognition in his eyes. He knew the truth. He was playing along perfectly. He gave Linda a polite smile. "Of course, Mrs. Thompson. Why don't you both come into my office and we'll go over the paperwork?" We sat down across from him, the walls lined with photos of happy families, cheerful residents, a picture of care. Harris pulled out a folder and laid it on the desk. Linda leaned forward eagerly, flipping through the forms. "Now," Harris said slowly, folding his hands, "before we proceed, I want to clarify a few details. Who will be financially responsible for this placement?" Linda didn't hesitate. "Oh, I'll handle everything. I've already arranged for his accounts, and once the property is under my name..." She stopped. For the briefest second, her lips tightened, realizing she'd revealed more than she intended. But Harris didn't react. He simply nodded, his pen hovering over the form. "I see," he said. "And you're certain your husband agrees with this?" "Of course," Linda said quickly, her voice too sharp, too eager. He knows this is the best thing for him. Harris turned to me. Mr. Thompson, is that true? Do you want to be placed here under your wife's request? I let the silence hang for a long moment. Linda's hand squeezed mine under the desk, her nails digging in, warning me to answer the way she wanted. Finally, I leaned forward, my voice calm but steady. Actually, Mr. Harris, my wife doesn't know the full story. I think it's time she heard it. Linda's face froze. She blinked at me, confusion flashing across her eyes, then fear. Harris nodded slowly, closing the folder with a snap. The sound echoed in the room like a gavel striking. For the first time in 40 years, the balance of power shifted, and Linda had no idea just how badly she was about to lose. Linda's nails dug deeper into my hand as if she could squeeze the words right out of me. But it was too late. I wasn't her obedient husband anymore. I turned to Mr. Harris, my voice steady, though inside my heart pounded like a drum. For 40 years, I believed my wife loved me. I believed every word, every smile, every promise she made. But I recently learned that all of it was an act. Linda's head snapped toward me, her face a portrait of shock and indignation. What are you talking about? She hissed, her voice rising just a little too high. I didn't flinch. I looked her in the eye, letting the silence stretch before I spoke again. I overheard you, Linda, that night in the kitchen. On the phone. You said it yourself, 40 years wasted just for property. You never loved me? You loved the land, the house, the bank accounts. Her lips parted, but no words came out. For once, she was speechless. Mr. Harris leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable, though I caught the flicker of something. Respect. Maybe in his eyes. That's absurd, Linda finally snapped, her voice trembling. You must have misheard. He's confused, Mr. Harris. He hasn't been well lately. There it was. The card she had always counted on, making me look weak, senile, incapable. But this time I was ready. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder, setting it gently on the desk. The screen lit up, displaying file after file. Confused? I asked softly. Then explain why I recorded your little phone call, or why I found that folder in your study, with notes about transferring deeds behind my back. The color drained from her face. She glanced at Harris, then back at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. For the first time in 40 years, she looked powerless. I didn't press play. Not yet. The threat of the truth was enough to crack her armor. Linda, I said, lowering my voice, I trusted you with everything. My youth, my dreams, my family. And you threw it all away for money you will never touch. Not a dime. Not a brick. Not an inch of this land will ever be yours. Mr. Harris cleared his throat, his tone professional but firm. Mrs. Thompson, perhaps we should pause here. This facility doesn't engage in matters of fraud or coercion. If your husband is being pressured into arrangements against his will, we are obligated to report it. Linda whipped around, her face twisted in panic. This is ridiculous. He's lying. He's trying to... But the words died in her throat. Because deep down she knew she had lost control and I wasn't even finished yet. The recorder sat between us like a loaded gun. I hadn't pulled the trigger, but she knew I could, at any moment. For the first time in decades, she wasn't the one holding the power, I was. For 40 years, I had watched Linda control every situation with ease. She always had an answer, a smile, a clever twist of words that made people believe her version of the story. But that day in Mr. Harris's office, I saw something I had never seen before. Fear. Her eyes darted from me to Harris, back to the recorder, then to the folder Harris had quietly closed on his desk. She opened her mouth, but the polished words didn't come. Instead, her voice cracked. This is all some misunderstanding, she stammered, forcing a shaky laugh. He's confused. He's making things up because he doesn't want to accept that he needs help. I leaned back in my chair, calm as the eye of a storm. Really? Then explain the notes in your handwriting about the title transfer. Or the part where you said I'd never see through your act. Her hands twitched against her lap. She shook her head. I was venting. You know how stressful things can get. I didn't mean it like that. For 40 years? I asked coldly, her cheeks flushed, her voice rising. Don't twist my words. You always do this. You make me out to be the villain when I've sacrificed everything for this family. Everything. That was the moment the mask truly began to crumble. Her voice wasn't sweet anymore. It was sharp, bitter, desperate. The polished wife the world admired was slipping away, revealing the raw greed underneath. Mr. Harris cleared his throat. "Mrs. Thompson, I must remind you that attempting to misrepresent your husband's condition or his consent is a very serious matter. We document everything here. If this continues, we'll be required to involve the authorities." Linda whipped toward him, her composure fracturing further. "You don't understand. I've done everything for him. 40 years. And what do I get in return? Nothing. Do you know what it's like to live in the shadow of someone else's property? Someone else's name? I've earned that land. I've earned it." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for the first time the truth slipped out in raw, unfiltered anger. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers. "There it is," I said quietly. "The truth you could never keep hidden forever. You didn't marry me. You married the land. You married the property. And you wasted 40 years pretending, thinking you could fool me to the very end," she gasped, realizing what she had just revealed. But it was too late. Harris's pen had already scratched across the page in his notes, capturing every word. "Mrs. Thompson," Harris said firmly, his voice sharp now, "this conversation is over. You are not permitted to proceed with any arrangements for your husband without his explicit consent." Linda slumped back in her chair, her face pale, her hands trembling. I watched her carefully, the woman I had once loved reduced to a desperate, cornered figure. For 4 decades she had played the role of the perfect wife. But now, her mask was in pieces on the floor, and the world was finally seeing her for who she truly was. The silence in Harris's office was heavy, the kind that pressed against your chest. Linda sat stiffly in her chair, her face pale, her mask in ruins. For the first time in our marriage, she had no script, no clever words to spin her web, and that was when I decided it was time to end the charade. I reached into my bag and pulled out another folder, thick, heavy with documents. I laid it on the desk, sliding it toward Mr. Harris. Linda's eyes followed it, wide with panic. "Do you know what this is?" I asked her calmly. She swallowed hard. "What are you doing?" "This," I said, tapping the folder, "is 40 years of my life. My land, my house, my savings, everything I've built with my own hands. And do you know what else it is? It's untouchable. Because I've already made sure of it." Mr. Harris opened the folder, flipping through page after page. Deeds, trusts, legal amendments, and wills, all recently updated, all ironclad. Linda leaned forward, her voice shaking. What have you done?" I met her eyes, steady and unflinching. "I did what you never thought I could do. I stopped being your fool. Every deed, every account, every asset, and it's all locked in a trust. A trust you will never have access to, not now, not ever." Her hands trembled as she reached toward the folder, but Harris closed it firmly before she could touch it. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his tone sharp, "these documents are legally binding. Whatever plan you thought you had, it's over." She turned back to me, desperation spilling over. "You can't do this. After everything I've done for you." I cut her off, my voice cold as steel. "Everything you've done to me, you mean? You wasted 40 years pretending to be my wife, my partner, my friend. But now I see it clearly. You were never any of those things. You were just a tenant in my life waiting for me to die so you could cash out." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked smaller somehow, like the years of scheming had collapsed on her shoulders all at once. I leaned closer, my voice dropping so only she could hear. "Do you want to know the best part, Linda? The land you coveted so much, the house you pretended to love me for, it's already gone. I signed it into a trust for the grandchildren. They'll grow up on it, they'll inherit it. And you won't get a single brick, not even the dirt under your fingernails." Her eyes widened in horror, tears brimming but never falling. She shook her head in disbelief as though her entire world had just shattered, and in a way it had. Mr. Harris leaned back, his voice final. "Mrs. Thompson, I think this conversation is over. If you continue to harass or attempt to coerce your husband, the authorities will be notified." Linda slumped in her chair, defeated. 40 years of scheming, 40 years of pretending, 40 years of lies, all reduced to nothing in a matter of minutes. I stood slowly, pushing my chair back, my eyes never leaving hers. "You should have loved me, Linda," I said softly. "That's all I ever wanted. And if you had, everything would have been yours without a fight. But you couldn't, and now, you've lost it all. Her lips trembled, but she said nothing, because she knew it was true. The drive home from the nursing facility was the quietest ride of my life. Linda kept her hands tight on the steering wheel, her knuckles white, her jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle twitch. The woman who had hummed cheerfully on the way there was gone. Now she radiated fury, silent, simmering, dangerous. I sat in the passenger seat, calm as a man who had just won a long and bitter war. Because in truth I had. When we pulled into the driveway, she slammed the car door so hard it rattled the windows. She stormed into the house without a word, her heels clicking against the floor like warning shots. I followed her slowly, almost leisurely, as though I had all the time in the world. Inside, she spun on me, her eyes blazing. "How dare you humiliate me like that?" In front of a stranger, no less. "Do you have any idea how foolish you looked carrying on with your little performance?" I laughed softly, the sound surprising even me. "Performance? That's rich coming from you. You've been performing for 40 years. I just gave you a taste of your own play." Her face contorted, fury mixing with panic. "You think you've beaten me, don't you? You think locking everything in some trust will stop me? I've given my whole life to this family. I'll find a way to take what I deserve." I stepped closer, my voice low and measured. "You gave your life to greed, Linda, not family. And that's why you'll never win. I've already taken every precaution. Every legal stone has been turned over. You can scream, you can threaten, you can beg, but the truth is you've lost." Her eyes darted away, searching the room like she could find an escape from the truth written on the walls. Then her voice cracked, a sound halfway between anger and desperation. "So what now? You're just going to sit there and gloat? Pretend like you're the saint and I'm the villain?" I tilted my head, studying her. "I don't have to pretend. You did that for me for 40 years. But the mask is gone now. Everyone will see you for who you really are. A woman who wasted her life chasing property instead of love." Her knees buckled, and for a moment she looked like she might collapse. She steadied herself on the table, her breathing ragged, her eyes wild. "You'll regret this," she whispered, her voice trembling but dangerous. "You'll regret making me your enemy?" I stepped back, folding my arms. "No, Linda, the only person you've ever been an enemy to is yourself." The silence that followed was heavy, but it was no longer mine to bear. For 40 years I had carried the weight of her lies, her deception, her false affection, but not anymore. That burden was hers now. I walked away, leaving her standing there in the kitchen, trembling in the ruins of the life she had carefully constructed. For the first time in decades, I felt free. And she? She had nothing left but her fury, and the haunting realization that her 40-year performance had ended in absolute failure. I knew Linda wouldn't stay quiet for long. She had lost too much in one day, and someone like her never accepts defeat easily, so it didn't surprise me when, 2 evenings later, the kids showed up at the house, all 3 of them, together, their faces tight with worry and confusion. "Dad? Mark?" Our eldest began cautiously. "Mom called us, she said you're making changes behind everyone's back, that you're not thinking clearly." There it was. The first shot in her new war. If she couldn't beat me in the open, she would poison me in the eyes of the people I loved most. I sat in my chair calmly, gesturing for them to sit. Linda hovered near the doorway, her arms crossed, her eyes burning into me. She wanted to watch me crumble under the weight of their questions, but she was about to learn I had prepared for this too. "Your mother's right about one thing," I said evenly. "I have made changes, but not behind anyone's back. I've done it to protect this family." "To protect you?" They exchanged glances. I could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They had grown up believing their mother was the strong one, the organizer, the planner. It was easy for them to believe her version of things. Linda seized the moment. "See?" she snapped. "He's hiding things." "He's not well, children. He's paranoid, confused. That lawyer of his has gotten in his head. He's going to ruin everything we've built." "Built?" I repeated quietly, turning my gaze on her. "Tell them, Linda, built or stolen, go on. Tell them why you dragged me to that nursing home. Tell them about the notes you kept in your study, planning to take everything once I was gone." Her face drained of color. "That's a lie," she shouted, too quickly, too desperately. I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out the recorder again. The same little device that had changed everything in Harris's office. I placed it gently on the table. "Kids," I said softly, "I didn't want you to hear this, but your mother left me no choice." I pressed play, and there it was, her voice, cold and casual, from that night in the kitchen. "Once everything is signed, the house and land will be mine. Can you believe he still thinks I love him? 40 years and he never saw through it." The room went dead silent. My children's faces crumpled as the truth poured out of the tiny speaker. Linda lunged forward, slamming her hand down to stop the recording. "It's not what it sounds like. I was upset. I didn't mean it like that." But the damage was done. Tears welled in my daughter Emily's eyes as she whispered, "Mom, how could you?" Mark shook his head slowly. Disbelief and disappointment etched across his face. 40 years, Mom? 40 years? Linda's mouth opened, but no words came. For once, she had no performance left, no script to hide behind. I leaned back in my chair, my voice steady. "You wanted to turn the children against me, Linda. Instead, you showed them the truth yourself. The mask is gone, and now they know." Linda stumbled back a step, her hands trembling. The fortress she had spent decades building wasn't just crumbling anymore. It was collapsing in front of the very people she had hoped to control. And for the first time in her life, she stood utterly alone. For 40 years, Linda had worn her mask flawlessly. But now, with her children staring at her like strangers, it shattered into jagged pieces. Emily covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Mark sat stiffly in his chair, his fists clenched, his jaw tight with restrained anger. Even our youngest, Daniel, the quiet one who always defended his mother, sat pale, staring at her like he'd never seen her before. Linda's breathing grew uneven. Her eyes darted from one child to the next, desperate for a lifeline, for someone to pull her back into the safety of her illusions. You don't understand," she stammered, her voice rising in pitch. "I did everything for this family. Everything. Do you think your father gave you this house? These opportunities? No, it was me. I kept it all together. I sacrificed my life so you could have one." Her words came out in a rush, wild and untethered. But instead of sympathy, they were met with silence. Emily shook her head slowly, her voice trembling. "No, Mom. Dad worked himself to the bone for this family. We saw it. We lived it, and you were just waiting to collect." Linda's eyes flared, her body trembling. "Don't you dare talk to me like that," she snapped, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. She turned on Mark, her voice frantic. "Tell her. Tell them I did this for all of us. For you, for your children. Everything was for the family." But Mark's face was carved from stone. His voice was low, steady, and devastating. "No, Mom, everything was for you." The words hit her like a blow. Her knees buckled and she staggered back, grabbing the edge of the table for balance. Her composure, her carefully curated image, was gone. In its place stood a woman unraveling before her own children, her lies exposed, her greed laid bare. She tried one last card. Tears. Real ones this time, not the practiced kind she had used at funerals and family gatherings. She sank into a chair, her body shaking, sobs breaking free from her chest. "You don't understand," she whispered through tears. "Do you know what it's like to spend your life feeling invisible? To watch someone else get all the credit, all the love, while you're just there? I had nothing. I needed something to hold on to. The property, it was all I had." Her voice cracked, and for a brief moment the room was still. Even I felt the sting of her words. But then Daniel spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "You had us, Mom, you had us. And you chose land over your own family." Linda's sobs turned into a choked gasp. She looked at him, the child who had defended her the longest, and saw nothing but disappointment in his eyes. That was the breaking point. Her shoulders slumped. Her hands fell limp in her lap and the fight drained out of her. The mighty scheming woman who had fooled the world for 40 years sat defeated in her own living room, surrounded by the family she had betrayed. And in that silence, I realized something profound. Revenge wasn't always about anger or destruction. Sometimes the cruelest revenge was simply letting the truth speak for itself, and the truth had broken her more thoroughly than I ever could. The house was quiet, save for the sound of Linda's uneven sobs. The woman who had once commanded every room she entered now sat slumped in her chair, Her mascara streaked, her shoulders hunched, her eyes hollow. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. But then I remembered 40 years of lies. The cold phone call I had overheard, the folder hidden in her drawer, the way she had smiled as she prepared to send me away like an old piece of furniture she no longer needed. No, pity wasn't what she deserved. Truth was, I rose from my chair slowly, the floor creaking under my weight. Everyone's eyes followed me. The children's wide with shock, Linda's red-rimmed and desperate. I stood tall, steady, the way I had felt in Harris's office when the power finally shifted back into my hands. "Linda," I said softly, but my voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Do you want to know why you lost? It wasn't because I outsmarted you with lawyers or trusts. It wasn't because I tricked you into revealing yourself. It was because in all your scheming you never once understood what mattered most." She looked up at me, her lips trembling. I turned slightly, gesturing to our children. Family, love, loyalty. Those are the things you can't fake forever. And in chasing property, you lost all of them. Emily wiped her tears, nodding slowly. Mark's jaw tightened as he looked at his mother, disappointment radiating from him. Even Daniel, who had always stood by her side, stared at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. Linda shook her head weakly. I didn't mean—" I raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "No, you did mean it. Every word, every action, every year you spent playing a role instead of being a wife, a mother, a partner. You meant it. And now you're left with nothing but the ashes of your own lies." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so that it carried the weight of finality. "Legally, you have nothing. The trust is airtight. Every deed, every account, every cent of what I worked for will bypass you completely. You won't touch a dime. And emotionally, you've lost the respect of the very children you thought you could manipulate. That's the final blow, Linda, not from me. From the truth itself." Her face crumpled, her sobs renewed, but weaker this time. Not the cries of a woman fighting, but of one already broken. I turned back to the children, my voice gentler now. "From this day on, our family will move forward in honesty. No more lies. No more masks. We will rebuild what she tried to destroy." Mark nodded firmly. Emily reached for my hand, and Daniel, after a long pause, finally lifted his eyes to meet mine with a silent, steady acknowledgement. Linda remained in her chair, staring at the floor, unable to move. I had delivered the final blow. And it wasn't anger or revenge that ended her. It was the undeniable truth, the one thing she could never twist to her advantage. The 40-year performance was over, and the curtain had finally fallen. The days after that night were quiet, almost eerily so. The house, once filled with the false warmth of Linda's performance, now echoed with a different kind of silence. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was cleansing. Linda moved like a ghost through the halls. She no longer snapped orders, no longer filled the air with her practiced laughter. She barely spoke at all. And when she did, it was to herself, muttering as though trying to rewrite history in whispers only she could hear. The children visited more often in those weeks. Not for her, but for me. They stayed close, helping with small chores, sharing meals, filling the emptiness with genuine love, the kind I had thought I'd lost long ago. And though it hurt them to see their mother so broken, they knew the truth could never be undone. One evening, Emily sat with me on the porch, the sun setting in streaks of orange and gold across the horizon. She reached for my hand, her voice soft. "Dad, how did you live with it? 40 years of pretending, of not knowing?" I thought about that for a long moment. Because I believed, sweetheart. I believed in love and loyalty and the vows we make. And I'd rather be the fool who believes in love than the fool who wastes a life chasing greed. She nodded, her eyes glistening. And I knew then that despite the pain, despite the betrayal, something good had come of it. My children had seen the truth about love and loyalty, and they would never repeat their mother's mistakes. As for Linda, she remained in the house, but she was no longer truly there. She drifted like a shadow, sitting for hours in the very chair she once mocked me for loving, her hands wrung together constantly, her lips moving in soundless rehearsals of excuses no one wanted to hear anymore. And me? I found peace, not in revenge but in justice, in knowing that her lies had not destroyed me but revealed me, stronger, wiser, freer than I had ever been. The property, the land, The house and all the things she coveted were secured for the grandchildren. A legacy built on truth, not lies. She could look at it every day, but she would never touch it. That was her punishment. To live surrounded by the very thing she had sacrificed her soul for, and know it would never be hers. One night, as I sat alone in the quiet, I thought back to that rainy evening when I first overheard her betrayal. I remembered the knife of her words, the hollow ache in my chest, the disbelief that nearly shattered me. And then I realized that moment, painful as it was, had set me free. Linda had spent 40 years pretending to be someone she wasn't. I had spent 40 years believing in someone who didn't exist. But the truth had torn the illusion apart, and in the ruins, I found myself again. So if you ask me now, after everything, if I regret those 40 years, my answer is simple. No, because her lies may have stolen decades. But the truth gave me back my dignity, and in the end, that was worth more than all the property in the world.